have you back.
Thank you, Rebecca. It is very nice to be back.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome one of my favorite authors, David Kindop.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Originally, when I met David, he had just finished this marvelous book. And I read it, and of course since then, David has written a lot of things, and he's working on another book. But Dave, tell our people about this wonderful book. Tell us. Just tell us about this book that you wrote and what got you started on all this delicious international nonsense.
Yeah, right, international nonsense. Well, we're not talking about Singapore, The first time I visited Mexico, I was always very much drawn to Mexico. And Mazatlan was one of my favorite places originally in my pursuit of visiting Mexico. I got captured by the idea of bringing a sailboat to Mazatlan and starting a sailing charter company. This was a lot of years ago, 20 plus years ago, and nobody was doing it, and it was an old funky harbor, and I just fell in love with that whole idea. So I went to Mazatlan, I bought an old boat, I fixed it up, I took it to Mexico, to Mazatlan, to get into the sailing charter business with a couple of Mexicans that had a ragtag sport fishing fleet there, 5 or 6 boats, and they were all beat up. And I met them through some mutual friends, and they told me, sure, if I brought a boat to Mazatlan, I could get in the sailing charter business. So excited about that whole idea, I went and bought an old boat and fixed it up and brought it to Mazatlan. And this was before NAFTA and before everybody on the planet had a cell phone. It was a different era, absolutely, for sure. I mean, a lot of people didn't even have a landline in Mazatlan, and even those didn't work. It was a whole different era. And I ended up writing about that whole experience, going to Mazatlan, bringing a boat, going through about 3 years of just complete craziness, trying to get legal, and back and forth a couple of times to the States, and bringing coming back. I sailed to Mazatlan. I sold most of my possessions, my car, everything. So then when I came back, I had to buy another car. I bought an old Jeepster, which is on the cover of the book, my old Jeepster, right? I brought a travel trailer down to Mexico, to Mazatlan, and I got my papers back and forth. And anyway, through a 3-year period of trying to get legal, which never happened, I went through trials and tribulations. Got arrested. I was kind of under house arrest one night. I almost went to jail for illegal chartering. When my partner said, "Oh, don't worry, everything is under control," they kept reassuring me that, "Oh, we've got it handled." Well, they didn't. That one night was a very scary night, very scary, where I definitely thought I was going to go to jail. I didn't. And I'm very glad I didn't. As it turns out, I went later, the next year, to the jail to get a piece of paper that said I wasn't wanted for anything in Mexico from the police department. How they knew that, I'll never know. And because the guy I went into to get to further this whole permission thing, we went into the jail and with my old buddy Federico. And so this guy goes in an old World War II issue Army desk and an old typewriter, and he pulls out a piece of stationery from the police department. He looks at me, he rolls the stationery in the typewriter, he writes a letter that says I'm not wanted for anything in Mexico, and signs it and hands it back to us, and we give him 200 pesos. One more piece of the information that's necessary to get me supposedly legal, which never happened. It was a crazy time. It was a very crazy time. And I bought this boat in Sacramento, near Sacramento, California, and I worked on it there. And then I took it to Sausalito and worked on it some more. And then I sailed it from Sausalito to Mazatlan. In Mexico, as anybody who's spent any time there knows, Mañana doesn't mean tomorrow. And it could mean not today or sometime in the future when we get around to it. That's what it'll be, or that's what it represents.
It means perhaps, then.
It means perhaps. And what really happens with Mañana in Mexico is that you'll have a conversation with anybody about anything, any number of times, and if they say Mañana, for them it might mean tomorrow, and it might really be that they'll do something, or something will take place tomorrow, or it may mean for them it ain't never going to happen, and I'm just telling you what you want to hear. Or it might mean for them, yeah, well, I'm really honest and sincere about this, but it may or may not ever happen, and I'll get around to it. So you just never know. If you plan on operating with Mañana, meaning tomorrow, then you'll be completely frustrated every day, every step of the way. You have to either pin somebody down, if that's even possible, or you just have to understand that, well, it may or may not happen tomorrow, and I have to do what I have to do, and if I have to depend on somebody else, then I better understand that it may or may not ever happen. And it's a tough way to do business.
Sounds like it's an impossible way to do business.
Well, that's why Mexico is Mexico. I mean, that's why it's taken Mexico a long time to come out of third world status, which they are doing now. Events in this book took place 20 plus years ago, and things have definitely changed in Mexico. And I'd say in the last 10 years, Mexico has gone, they've leaped forward 50 years in terms of lifestyle, middle class, technology, those kinds of things, and their attitude about getting things done.
Wow. So you had a dream, and you took it and banked on it and jumped into it and tried to make it a reality, only to find out it was just a dream.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think what I discovered in that, very, very vividly, is that if you don't have a dream in this life, you pretty much don't have anything else. If you have a dream, and if you're in pursuit of a dream that doesn't harm anybody else, then that is a great endeavor. That is a great endeavor. Even if you fail, pursue something wildly attractive, then you've really done something in your life to really give it texture and breadth and patina.
I think that your writing was obviously extremely enriched by your experiences and devastation and joy in Mexico.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I never understood about a lot of things in life in terms of emotion and introspection. I mean, I began to be fairly introspective before I went to Mexico. But when you are stranded, literally stranded, let's say in Mazatlan, and your boat has been impounded, and you can't do anything, you can't work, because in those days you just could not work. You couldn't do anything, and you still really can't. You can't take a Mexican's job. So there was no work and no money, waiting for permiso day after day, week after week, month after month. And sometimes I think I spent 3 months, 4 months one time just waiting, and with nothing really to do but just hang on and contemplate. And I had a few great books that I could read, and I began to make notes in my journal, of course, and do some writing. The whole concept of learning to be comfortable with inaction is a real challenge. It's a challenge for especially us north of the border. That's a very big challenge. And now, I mean, I live in a way that I want to get things done, and I do get things done. But when inaction surfaces, I don't freak out. Like, okay, what's that trying to tell me? Because inaction, I think, often tells you to calm down, relax, and just breathe deeply.
And ultimately, when you quit worrying, if you can,
right,
it creates great introspection.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's a great Jimmy Buffett wrote a great song. And by the way, I mentioned Jimmy Buffett in this book a few times, quoting him. And I quote Jimmy Buffett, and I quote the Gnostic teachings of Jesus, and I quote Shakespeare and John MacDonald, a lot of different authors that I introduce and conclude portions of my writing with those quotes that seem to encapsulate what I've written about in kind of a funny, entertaining way. The great lyric that Jimmy Buffett wrote, and he talks about how he buys a watch, and he said something like, "I bought a cheap watch from a crazy man floating down canal. It doesn't have numbers or moving hands. It always just says now." and you may think that I've been had, but this watch is never wrong. And the warranty says, if I ever have trouble, breathe in, breathe out, move on. and that's a great way to look at life, I think. That's a great way to look at life. And protracted time in Mexico definitely creates that view.
I think that the thing you came away with, among other things, is a great introspection on people and differences. That's one of the gifts in your writing. That's what makes it so wonderful. With each writing that you put forth in your articles, and David writes articles all the time for the Mazatlan Messenger, but each one of them, David, presents a different and, should I say, contrasting and embracing point of view. And that is a quality that isn't found everywhere. Most people, when they write, here's my point of view, period, over and out.
Well, I really appreciate that's what you see in my writing, because I don't purposefully set out to do that a lot of the time. Sometimes, yes, of course, I have a real plan in mind and I want to show or illustrate a certain idea or a certain way to look at something. But mostly I just try to tell the story as it shakes out.
The quality that you bring out in differences is one of your greatest powers in writing, Dave. It really is. It is by our differences that we create expansion of understanding, growth. Our differences build the bridges.
Integration in terms of society, that's what I really love about Mazatlan. And it's not so much that it doesn't happen in this book so much, but over time, I have a really wonderful, great friend there that I've known for 30 years who I met during the time of this book, Roberto. And he's just like a brother to me, and I've lived next to him, and I've lived in his neighborhood, and I know what it's like to be in that kind of a scenario where you're really living with, quote-unquote, the common person in Mexico. And that's a fantastic experience. I didn't have so much of that in this book. I lived on the boat, and then for a while I lived in this apartment right on the beach. I went down, I was like, I'm going to be in business. I'm going to live on the beach. It's the life, great life, the palm trees and all that stuff. And that, of course, became highly interrupted several times with the confusion and craziness. But, yeah. And that reminds me, there's a part in this story where I'm in Mazatlan, and I sailed down with a lady companion who was a sailor, supposedly, and she just totally folded during that trip because we had a harrowing experience on the ocean, and it was very scary, and she just wasn't up to the challenge, and she left right away when we got to Mazatlan. She was like, bye-bye. And, so I'm there, and I'm single. I'm floating around town, and I was dallying one evening with a lady on the beach after dark, and we were interrupted by a couple of federales, and they came up on the beach, and I can't tell you exactly what the situation was. You'll have to read it. But I looked up to see this rifle pointed at me right at my forehead. It was about 3 feet away, and that really changes your perspective.
Just because you were obviously a foreigner, or you don't know? No,
we were like, well, probably both. Young kids, they've got their fatigues on, and they're just patrolling the beach. They're trying to keep it safe, which is cool. And it's probably 10 o'clock at night, and we're on the beach and we're laying on a blanket or whatever, and I don't want the beach. It's like, get a room. Well, he spoke English. This guy did.
Oh, well,
that didn't matter to him. He was just enjoying pointing the rifle at me and scaring the hell out of me, which he did.
Yeah.
Yeah, which he definitely did. I think that what people say when they read this book is that they get a whole interesting sense of Mazatlan in Mexico that they never would unless you really lived there and really stayed there. And even some of the folks that live there, they are never going to experience some of the things that I did, because I tried to run a business or start a business. I was breaking a million laws, state, national, federal laws. But my partner said, no problema, And so here I am, ignorance is bliss, right? And so I'm doing and I'm hanging out with my buddy Roberto, and when I first met him, he was living in a little shack, tar paper shack with a big 55-gallon barrel in the middle of it and a dirt floor for water. And so I'm seeing things that a lot of people that even live there permanently don't see. A lot of them do because they're adventuresome and they get out and about. But what happens in this is you get a whole new experience about Mexico in this 3-year window that I write about, from the time I leave, pretty much from the time I leave Sausalito till the time I drive back out of Mexico 3 years later in my old Jeepster with my tail between my legs because Mexico has just kicked my ass. I was my own worst enemy in a lot of ways because I believed people I shouldn't. I wanted it so bad. I just kept coming back for more and more. Pow! Oh yeah, give me another one because I want to make this happen. And again, it's Mexico and it's Mazatlan, and Mazatlan's got a special reputation in Mexico, as I found out over the time I went there and came back and forth. Mazatlan has a reputation of being kind of a beer drinking, hell raising beach town. A bunch of crazy, illiterate people that live there. So if you talk about Mazatlan to somebody in Guadalajara or Mexico City, it's like, whew, Mazatlan, kidding? all those beachaholic drunkards live in Mazatlan. So it works a different way. I mean, I've had people tell me that live in other parts of Mexico. Mazatlan's a whole different deal. I didn't know that, and so it's a little bit more Wild Westy than a lot of parts of Mexico.
Wow.
Yeah, right. Wow.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah. So you learn, and the only way to learn that is to go through it. Right. And my partners, I mean, they had to deal with Marco, one of the port captain people, and somehow Marco didn't tell somebody else above him, or they didn't pay somebody a couple of pesos enough, or whatever, and somebody got out of the loop and got mad, and then they decided they were going to make me pay. And I can see that. I mean, if I was a Mexican and I came to San Diego, and I brought my boat up and I started hauling people out and giving them a tour of San Diego Bay without any licenses or permits, I wouldn't last long doing that. So why would I really expect that to happen in Mexico?
Well, I can understand that, but eventually not being able to ever get them, ring around the rosies and all of the dead-end roads you kept running into, and all of the doors you bumped your head on when you tried to go through, that is really quite a story. That is extremely complicated.
I was very ignorant at the time, and all I would have had to do was find somebody, an official translator or whatever. But again, this was pre-internet. This was pre-www, worldwide. And so you had to ferret out everything you needed to find. I mean, you didn't get online and check out something. You had to go, physically go to wherever the office, the immigration, aduana, and all these different port captains. And I could have done that for sure. Had I been smart enough, I could have done that. I could have found somebody to help me. Roberto, at the time, he was a really young kid, but he spoke excellent English and Spanish. I could have said, hey, where can we go? But I was intimidated by his dad and his uncle that said, hey, we're taking care of it, And I thought, well, it's their country, their deal. And this was, like I said, this was pre-NAFTA, this was pre-cell phone and pre-internet. So it was kind of like, okay. And there weren't that many gringos in Mazatlan, and they weren't all gathered around like they are now. They're all twice a week, there's meetings, and there's all this stuff going on. And so you didn't have the communication that you do now. So it was a whole different world. Yeah, a whole different world.
The adventures that you had were scary, breathtaking. I mean, that is quite a book. That's quite a book. The thing I really admire about the difficulties that you had is that you came away with it as an adventure and not a threat.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You totally came away with it. This is my adventure in Mexico.
Right.
Some people would say, this is my in Mexico, and I can't ever deal with it again.
Right.
But you say, yeah, and I'm looking forward to going back.
Oh, and I have. I've been back a lot, and I've lived there again, and I have great friends there, and I'm going to go back. No question about it.